What's going on, everyone? Today we're here with Reverend Dwight Webster. Now he's here today to speak to us about a lot of different things about his works and ministry, definitely the church. We have a lot of questions for him. So Reverend Webster, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate the opportunity.
So Reverend Webster, what made you get into ministry?
Well, my response is pretty much stock and trade. After accepting Christ and becoming a believer at a young age, I lived just like everybody else did and went through the developmental phases. Could be called a church mouse. Kind of grew up in the church, but this call to the ministry kind of came as my understanding of God laying out a purpose and a plan for my life.
So once you find out about that purpose, what made you say, like, you know what? I feel like it's my calling in life to be a pastor.
Yeah, well, I guess the pastor part came a little bit later. Preaching the gospel. I was actually a math major at Howard University when the call came, and I decided to major in that because I didn't want to be poor the rest of my life, and I figured with math in the background, I'd always have a job. But then God said, "Look, I have another job too." And then the peculiar thing was, okay, I was ready to jettison the math, and then God said, "No, you didn't quite get that. Abide in the calling wherein you were called." And I found out teaching math was actually one of the first forays into ministry for me because I could help liberate people who felt oppressed by mathematics.
Mathematics is something that definitely wasn't my favorite subject. I'm not gonna lie with you. I had many others I liked, but mathematics was not it. Now, why do you feel that a lot of us just don't like mathematics at all?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. Probably the most primary thing is we don't know that we're pretty much the people on the planet, at least in our history and heritage, through which what we know about math came. In northern Africa, well, we would not have geometry had it not been for the flooding of the Nile and having to recalculate property boundaries. So geometry and elementary trigonometry was the way and the means by which they recalculated what their property lines were with stretched strings, which is the Greek understanding of a straight line. So we don't know that. Secondly, there probably has been a disinformation campaign and a disincentivization project to keep us out of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math through the original sin of this country, being racism and chattel slavery. And then we perpetuated it ourselves, breaking that down into gender stuff. Women shouldn't do this, and so on and so forth. So I saw that it was a liberative task to say, wait a minute, let's take the counting that we know and let's extend that. And then personally, the reason I was attracted to math was because of my mother and how good she was with it.
No, so mom was always good with numbers.
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, she beat an adding machine because I used to do the grocery shopping. She would add up the list, and then the grocer would do the calculation. And when my mother had a total and he had a different total, he said the machine must be wrong. I never forgot that.
That's awesome because like today, a lot of times they trying to teach our kids just barely enough for them to get by. And we see all the different stories in the schools, how they're treating our children. They're not giving them the time that they need. They have this school or prison pipeline. Do you feel that we should go back to having more schools in the black communities like we used to have?
Yeah, interestingly enough, some of the measures that have been launched to try to have that happen have been kind of hijacked. For example, the charter school movement actually started out with parent teacher, other community involvement, and rich elements came in and hijacked it in New Orleans, where I was. There are some good charter schools around, but the issue is neighborhood schools, not so much charter. Whether it's a charter, private, public, parochial, if they're neighborhood schools, parental involvement, holistic, not just STEM, but STEAM, adding the arts, and STREAM, adding religious understanding. So not to proselytize, but that's part of the world.
Now, I just want to talk about, definitely also in ministry. And correct me if I'm wrong, you use the Ethiopian Bible in your ministry, correct?
Well, what I use is I'm clear that some of the earliest manuscripts that we have come from Northern Africa, from Coptic and Ethiopic texts. And having studied in seminary, we found out that first of all, there no one can say I have the original manuscripts. I have the first manuscripts of any particular book that's now accepted in the Bible. All those copies are the original pieces are gone, but there are copies, and that there are earlier copies, some containing things that we're familiar with, and some containing things we're not. So it's kind of what are the origins of the Bible we have now, whether you're Protestant, Catholic, or whatever. Where did those books come from? And I'm very clear that many of those manuscripts come from North Africa.
So why do you think that in, let's say, America for sure, the Bible they use, they took out many of the books, and they have 66 books in this particular Bible, and that's the one they want to promote versus, let's say, the Ethiopian Bible has 82 books, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds about right. Yeah, it's not so much. As a matter of fact, many of us who have studied at least the background, we don't relegate ourselves to any one particular translation because there are different features that different translations have. If you're Catholic, your Bible probably has 80 books. And people don't realize that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, or there's a whole wing of the Coptic and the Ethiopian Church that is earlier than some of the other manifestations that we have. So, what most people understand is a Western Christian church, but then there's an Eastern church, and then what divided off from that even earlier is the African church, which would be the African Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox rather, Ethiopian and Coptic church. So yes, they each everybody has their own Bible, quite frankly. But it's a matter of which are the reliable manuscripts.
No, so you've done a lot of work in African nations, correct?
Yeah, I guess my first trip was to the Gambia and Senegal through the church that I pastored in New Orleans. I'm currently the senior pastor of Beth Eden Baptist Church in West Oakland, but for about 28 and a half years, I was pastor of Christian Unity Baptist Church in New Orleans. And our first trip as a church was to the Senegambia region of West Africa.
So what did you do once you got there?
What we had in our membership, we had a travel guide tour agent who helped us to come up with something we think is viable for people going to the continent for the first time. And we call it cultural tourism. And that is rather than trying to go to Africa with some kind of false Western mindset, like the Europeans taught us and some of us adopted, we understood that even as African Americans, we're still Western.
Right.
But we wanted to go to Africa to regain our footing and our orientation. And since we had resources, let's go see and discover what the cultural riches of the region are, and let's contribute directly to them instead of paying some other big tour guide. So let's go to the schools, let's go to the shrines, let's go to the villages, and what little piece of money we have, what resources we have, we give them directly to the people. That's when we first traveled, we had a lot of teachers. So we took a lot of educational materials to leave with the children that we encountered.
So when you got there, at least from my experience, Reverend Webster, when you get there, you feel like you literally made it home. Did you feel the same way?
That is exactly how I felt. As a matter of fact, the only thing I didn't do is get out of the plane and kiss the oil stained tarmac.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest with you, that is what I felt like, and everyone that was on the trip, because we checked in with each other, we all felt that. Wow, it was like a settling inside of us. Like, yeah, we're home, we're home.
Yeah, and it's a feeling that most African Americans, unless they've been, couldn't relate to. But that's why now, because I had that feeling, I'm telling people, hey, get your passport, at least go visit, at least go see it one time. And
Right.
and did you feel at peace when you were there?
Yeah, it was a real piece. And now there are some things you can do to help yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never been to Africa, it helps maybe to go to the English speaking parts, or at least the parts where they are more familiar with English. In West Africa, we first went to the Senegambia. Gambia was had been colonized by the British. The Senegal had been colonized by the French. So at least we had that. But the country we visited the most was Ghana. And when they say Akwaba, that means welcome. They really do that. And they're English speaking. The other country we visited most was South Africa, which is also, again, English speaking, and a very large country. But then the other thing that we experienced was Hollywood and television has have those media have really misrepresented the continent. Africa is not a country; it's a continent, very diverse. And so, if you go to on one trip, if you go to Ghana or the Senegambia in West Africa, you're in the northern hemisphere. And then if you do what we did and then go down to South Africa, you're in the southern hemisphere. So when it's summer one place, it's winter another. And so that's another experience. And that's just globe, that's climate. But then when you look at the cities, when I first saw Dakar in Senegal, Dakar reminded me of Washington, D.C. When I first saw Cape Town in South Africa, flying into Cape Town reminded me of flying into the Bay Area and looking at Oakland. So there are all of those things. Are there villages? Yes, there's villages. Is there the bush? Yes, there's the bush. But there's modernized industrial life. There's the full range of whatever you could find anywhere else. You'll find it on the continent of Africa.
Right. And when I went to Ethiopia, even though they speak Amharic, but they speak a lot of English there as well,
They should.
especially in Addis Ababa. And even in Mekelle, when we was at, a lot of people spoke English. And like I said, they said the same thing to me constantly. Welcome home. They kept saying, bring your friends, that we need you here. And that kept took me for a loop because I've never had anybody in this country say, this is your home and we need you here. And you know what I'm saying? And actually mean it genuinely.
Yeah, you're right. And we didn't go to Ethiopia first. We went to Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
and into Cairo. We went down to the Aswan region, Aswan Dam, to the Nubian Museum, which is another experience people should see. All of the artifacts in the Nubian Museum that we saw looked like everybody that was on our tour and everybody that I had left back home. Like you and me. I'm looking at you, you see me. The sphinxes look like that in that museum. And everywhere we went, whether it was in Cairo, Luxor, or down in near the Aswan Dam, uh, folk were welcoming. It was, as a matter of fact, in some parts of West Africa, folk asked, "Well, what took y'all so long?"
Oh, really?
That's another discussion. But we were saying, yeah, well, we're here. Let's deal with that. But what they didn't understand, what we didn't realize, whether it's missionary, whether it's tourism, there are barriers for Africans and African Americans getting together, and it is not all of our doing.
You are so right about that. But there's a tide changing, and I'm pretty sure you can see it as well. More and more Africans and African Americans are starting to work together now. We definitely doing that here on our platform. Trying to build bridges to the continent and throughout the diaspora, because I feel that the way this country is going, morality wise, I mean, you see it. I mean, this country literally Babylon, the way it acts. What's good is evil, and what's evil is good. In
Yeah.
America. Um, we say this all the time that this is my opinion. I believe it's going to be an exodus out this country eventually, for us because of just what's going on. I mean, the writing's on the wall for me in a lot of instances. Maybe you see different.
No, no, no. Just like within the country, there's a migration. The history of African Americans moving in this country, they moved out of the deep South after the turn of the last century for a
Hmm.
couple different reasons, flooding and others. But then came the mass migration, the general Great Migration around World War II. A lot of those families and the folk that moved out west to the West Coast, many of them now there's a reverse migration. They're going back home to the South. Part of it, a good part of it, is because of the cost of living on the West Coast. But the other part has to do with it's a different life. Africa, the South, to many people is considered New Africa. And then fast forward into the '60s, a lot of folks said, let's regain our heritage. So a lot of folk, beat beat bang bang Umgawa folk, moved to West Africa. Some of them stayed; they never came back. And then there was another wave that went after that. And then I think maybe in the third wave we went. And in that third wave we found there were a lot of folk who were moving to Africa, to West Africa, and particularly in Southern Africa, in South Africa, cities like Durban. There's a lot of business enterprise and interaction between Africans and African Americans, because folk not only feel home, but they don't again have to go jump through the hoops that are erected artificially here in this country. So yeah, I think folk are going to be moving back to Africa, but for a multiplicity of reasons: for business, for cultural, for reconnecting, for spiritual reasons. I think all the above.
Now, you mentioned a lot of people moving back to the South, and I've told many brothers and sisters, that when they in the West Coast right now is what 6% African American, they're not being properly represented. I've said that many times. They need to come out of California and come to the South. I told them like right here in Houston, the population of African Americans here is 25%. Just in the city of Houston alone, got a black mayor, got a lot of it's actually more black people and also Hispanics here than it is Caucasians, and so a lot of black people come here and get a lot of great opportunity. So do you see more black people moving out of California because the way it's going? Because I mean, it's like I said, it's not good.
Well, if you look at this scenario, let's say a family through whomever um, came out to the West Coast, particularly let's say the Bay Area or even Southern California,
Right.
and whether the GI Bill or whatever, they bought a house. Let's say they even paid uh, 40, $50,000 for it. Well, that same house now, if it's in any decent shape, is worth 10 to 12 times what they paid for it. Hopefully, they paid off the mortgage. And what a number of people then do is, well, wait a minute, I can sell this house, move back to Houston, move back to Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. I can buy another house cash, put the rest of the money in the bank, or buy income property, and me and my family will be set. And I think that's good. But if it's done only for money, if it's only done for economics, I don't think that's sufficient. The population in San Francisco has gone down to the black population, the black percentage is 3.9% when black folk were in Bayview, Hunters Point, the Western Addition, the Tenderloin. They were all over the city,
Hmm.
and they're being pushed out by the ability for people to pay high salaries for high tech, and so they pushed them across the bay to the East Bay to Oakland, and then they got pushed out of Oakland to places even further away. So now I've left New Orleans and come to Oakland, and I see that the housing problem is the real issue, one of the real major issues. Homelessness like I've never seen, or as some people say, houselessness,
Hmm.
because people will make a home wherever they can. But that houselessness is due to the fact that there's a bubble, and that there seems to be no lid on how much you can charge for a house and actually push people out of where they lived all their lives. That will happen where the people are moving to, because it happened in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
Who could live a decent life, pay what, $750 for a one-bedroom apartment? That has jumped up to $1,200, $1,500 a month. So it can happen anywhere. Just depends on what the forces are, the market forces, and who's controlling what.
So you mentioned it at the South being like New Africa, because really the majority of Black Americans are in the South.
Yeah,
So you think that if we was to all come back to the South, and do you think we would actually do better that way?
I think some would do better, but I guess I'm a proponent of brighten, and this is my evangelical roots. Brighten the corner where you live. I
Right.
think I think black folk are like leaven, like yeast. We can blow up wherever we are. We can change it. And the reason I look at the South as New Africa is because what we call Southern hospitality is really African hospitality.
Right.
That's
You're
where it
100%
came.
right.
And when as you and I have already noted, when you go back to Africa, you see it. You see the
Yes,
roots.
sir.
Wow, we went to a village, and if we wanted to stay, they would have given us a plot of land and built for us a place to stay, because that's the way you do. And in the South, if you come to somebody's house, they will give you the shirt off their backs. So that's not European. That's not even American. That's African. So wherever we are, whether it's in New England, Lemuel Haynes, an African American minister who pastored a predominantly white congregation in New England, is now being celebrated. I see it on the newsreels that they're acknowledging that this black man changed the lives of rank and file folk in New England, and he did it as a black man. So I think that we ought to not abandon anywhere. The issue is, how do we get together wherever we are? Because just the sheer force of numbers of black folk being together in one place doesn't mean that blackness is manifested in the way that it should. Sometimes we got some really messed up behaviors because we're enslaved in our minds.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's because I want to ask you about the issue, a lot of issues that's within the black church. I mean, you've been in it for a long time now. I know you've seen the great era of the black church, where the black church was the strategy place to for many things in the civil rights movement. The church put out a lot of great people to fight for our liberation and freedom. But now today, and I'm not saying all, but now today is not about our liberation and freedom. It's about who's driving a Rolls Royce. They're not going out there and reaching, the community. You popping churches up everywhere, but then you got gangs going on just right around the corner from the churches. Why isn't a lot of churches aren't being effective anymore like they used to be at one point in time?
Yeah, and that's a fair question. It really is a fair question, but it's a complicated question. Yes, that even when we said that the church was the center of the black community, it was not monolithic. Take Birmingham, for example, 16th Street Baptist Church, where the four girls were killed. Well, the pastor lost his job because members in that church didn't want the church involved in civil rights. Back in the civil rights era, we all talk about Martin Luther King Jr., a clear product of the black church. But I was around when he was living. And I remember not everybody was a fan of Martin Luther King Jr. And as a matter of fact, not everybody was a fan of Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El Shabazz.
Hmm.
But looking back, we said, I marched with Martin Luther King. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. I did civil. No, you didn't. There was a cadre of people who were leading on behalf of the community. And again, to the extent that we internalized oppression, we fought our own leaders. And when the black community turned its back on any of our leaders, Malcolm X, Martin King, they were taken out. And so I'm a little less sanguine about glorifying that role. Yes, when we from slavery, from enslavement to civil rights, yes, it was the black church that was the center. But outside of the center, certainly before around the turn of the century, there were other organizations that partnered with the black church and made it really strong. So that's my sense. The strategy going forward is, even though there's decentralization in the black community and no longer is the black church the center, um, the strategy to me is to find a way to partner with the elements that are interested in advancing our community, liberating our people, and for me, uplifting Christ, because all of those things come together. If you're not interested in that, you know, if we find common cause, hey, we'll work together. But my agenda is to lift Christ, to lift humanity, and to lift my people. That's what I'm looking to do.
Well, you mentioned something that was quite interesting. You stated that when the black community turned their back on Malcolm X and turned their back on Martin Luther King, they were taken out. What is it about this fringe element that's in the black community that don't want to be free? Because they do have an element that actually like white supremacist oppression.
Yeah, yeah, and that I alluded to that earlier. It's what I call America's original, not me, but it's America's original sin. This country was built on racism. It was built on colonialism. It was built on the clear exploitation of African people. And in other words, and in order to keep people enslaved, you've got to not only enslave their body, but you have to enslave a significant portion of that population in their minds. In other words, they have to internalize the oppression. And again, every slave revolt, every slave revolt in this country was betrayed by somebody who said, who identified with the oppressor. And until we get liberated from this internalized oppression, this internalized racism, this internalized racial inferiority, it's always going to be something like that. So, again, I'm very clear that that was a strategy for every COINTELPRO, uh, the FBI, the government. Nixon's war on drugs was a war on anti-Vietnam and anti-black. That's what it was a war on. Even what's done today with a war on marijuana, that was because the moguls and the powers that be didn't want something that ended, that today is clearly of a health benefit. So when you internalize that oppression, and when you worship the power of money, now don't get me wrong, money is not evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. It's not. If anybody has some money for me, I'm happy to take it. But when you love it and you pursue it above and beyond everything else, it will twist you. It'll twist your mind, it'll twist your soul, and it'll twist your heart. And the power base of this country is wedded to that. So when you connect internalized oppression with this embracing of power of and the love of money, people will do anything, including your own family, will sell you out.
And that's extremely sad that that's selling out, because we've seen that selling out here. You know, we also see the selling out also on the continent of Africa. A lot of the leaders selling out the people just so they can get some nickels and dimes, and which is,
Exactly.
completely wrong. And is it that we just want to be materialistic, or why we want to sell out each other, or what do you think that just rooted in? Is it greed? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, yeah, all the above. But I think Martin Luther King Jr. in his Beyond Vietnam speech talked about the three giant triplets being militarism, racism, and shoot, what's the third? The materialism, militarism, and racism. Those three are the triplets that he talked about. And we fall prey. We fall prey to that. And one of the failures of the civil rights movement was to not pass the baton on to the next generation. They felt that, okay, look, we got our integration, and the integration as it was given, which was just a form of desegregation, destroyed a lot of the unity that we had. We had
Yes,
our
it
own
did.
stores, we had our own everything. We even had our own Black Wall Street. So that was external, and they took that down. But internally, we didn't maintain that same kind of communal unity. And so, yes, it is materialism. It is materialism. It's the imperialistic notion of this world in globalization, but it's also this understanding or refusal to understand that racism is a sin, and it is America's original sin. And black folk cannot be racist as the term is defined, but we certainly can internalize that racism and oppress one another.
Now you talking about desegregation. I want to talk about real quick before we wrap up about the black family. Do you feel that desegregation also destroyed the black family in many ways?
I don't know to if that's a very good question that I'd like to think more about. I think there were aspects of desegregation that contributed it to it. When we started thinking that we have to go live where somebody else is instead of living among ourselves, and then we take on their values and we handle our family the way they handle their family, yeah, I would say that contributed. But I mean, we're complicitous in our own demise. We're not above making mistakes that hurt us.
Right, because now today you have a lot of black folks with this individualistic mentality, and we move better as a tribe, move better as
Exactly.
one. That's how we move. So, I know that the white supremacists saw that we move like that and we get results. So they say, well, let's try to break up this black family. Let's try to get the man out of the household. Let's separate the children. Let's do everything we can so they can be individuals instead of together. And
Yeah.
so you saw an era of when we was moving, even though we had some division, yes, but you saw an era we moved together more so in a unit. Now looking at today, do you think we can repair the individualism that we have in the black community? Because it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I'm loving your question because just inculcated in your question is a notion of hope. Yes, I think it can be repaired, but we have to be very sanguine and clear about what has been done in this country at the level of policy. There's a book called The Color of Law. There's a book called Medical Apartheid. That the government and the powers that be, in fact, launched deliberately programs to destabilize black folk, the black family, and the black community. So we've got to be aware of what that is. It is a horrible thing when you have a 60% majority black or even a 25% majority black, for 25% black folk in a community, yet only 2% go to the polls to vote. And then complain about the man, the woman, the whoever, and you didn't vote. You don't
Right.
have anything to say. That's something we can do. We're poised to have a black woman as a governor, and we've got Georgia, we've got Florida. We can flip the Congress, and whatever is being done on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and with the Supreme Court, it can be mitigated if we step up and get into civic engagement. And just as somebody said, stay woke.
Right. Well, I get angry myself, Rev, when some black people say, "Oh, well, what voting is going to do?" I say, "Do you know you're disrespecting your ancestors when you say that? They have fought and they literally died trying to get the right to vote." And there's unfortunately, a lot of us don't understand politics. And you got
That's
to
right.
be political. It don't matter if you went to the continent of Africa. You still got to be political there. You can't
Yeah.
just sit back and expect somebody else to do what you want, and because they're not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, the notion of democracy, once again, just like mathematics, people give the Greeks credit for that. But even Greek scholars said they first saw the elements of democracy on the African continent in North Africa. So we have to understand that's our stuff. So let's go back and recapture our stuff. Let's do civic involvement, civic engagement, And Christians who are saved, sanctified, and Holy Ghost filled need to understand that we have a civic duty and that we've got to be involved, and voting is just a part of that.
I'm glad you mentioned that last thing. You said Christians that are saved, sanctified, and filled with the Holy Spirit. That's what you said, right?
That's it.
Okay. Aren't Christians, and I don't even like the term Christian, I don't even use that term. I rather use the term servant because that's what Jesus was. But
Mhm.
do you think all Christians, no matter what color, should be fighting against racism and white supremacy?
Again, my experience and my orientation is that racism is sin. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to fight against the devil in sin, that's one sin you can't overlook, because it'll take you down and take you out. And that's what it's done to us as a people. And again, as I said, when you internalize that, now you may not own a slave, but you can own that slave mentality and act like you're in a plantocracy. And are we going to protect somebody else's goods when they were stolen from us in the first place?
Well, Reverend, you do hear that sometimes when you speak up about racism and white supremacy, and then those who are could be white will say, "Well, I had nothing to do with that," and factually, they didn't have nothing to do with it. They probably didn't own a slave, but the thing is, what I always tell them is, this is where you're guilty at. You know good and well how this country started. You continue the same systems that will start off rape, oppression, murder, and slavery. So it does make you just as guilty because you never made it right. And you know in the scriptures, God wants you to make things right. And if you don't make it right,
Yeah.
you get in the same judgment too.
Yeah, and even if you don't make it right, you have to resist. Again, that Bible tells us resist the devil, and he or she or whatever will flee. So if we don't resist, you are exactly right. There are systems in place, not individual acts of oppression. We're talking about a system, and you have to then stand against the system, the systemic oppression, or benefit from it. And those who benefit from it then become partakers of it. And yes, your guilt then is associated with that. That's 100% correct. And that analysis has to be taught to our children, but also to our elders.
Correct, because like I said, the ideology, of white supremacy, believing that I should rule everyone non-white just because I'm superior because of my skin. That ideology is nothing but idol worship of themselves, fashion themselves as a god. That's all they did in my mind, saying that you're better than somebody. You're not better than no one because of the color of your skin. I think that's very stupid to say that, personally, because nobody controls the hue of their skin.
Right.
But anyone who supports that ideology, and for me, I see the judgment happening right in their faces. They don't even pay attention to it.
Mhm.
It's time out for that, but they don't. It's like they don't want to let it go. They don't want to
Well,
let it go.
but that's because it's based on lie. Whiteness is an ideological construct. There is no such thing as whiteness. This was something that was made up to press an advantage. To me, it's like a Bitcoin. Let's make up some currency and let's make money from it, or let's take loans, chop them up, sell pieces of loans, and make money hand over fist and oppress people, put folk out on the street. It's a construct, and it's a construct for superiority. So yes, there is something such as white supremacy, but there is not white superiority, because white does not exist. It's a construct that was made up, and it was given uh, force and power. And as long as we buy into it, we continue to do that. Now, we say, oh, then there's no such thing as blackness. Well, no, not true. Look at me, look at you. And then people were classified and categorized as a result of this lie and this construct. So it doesn't matter what the DNA is. If your condition or situation is a result of that lie, then you have a coherent group.
I agree with you, Pastor, so much. Well, I say it was definitely enlightening talking to you. How can people get in contact with you in case they hear this interview? They say, "Man, I want to ask the pastor some questions because I really want to get some even knowledge about history since you lived through it."
Yeah, yeah. Well, they can email me at the church at Beth Eden, Betheden, church at betheden.com. And I'll get the email, and I'll follow up on the contact.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So make sure you contact Reverend Webster here. Um, he had a lot to say. I enjoyed the conversation. This brother's definitely well rounded, very positive, and I love that. And I'm glad they got some pastors out there that's still doing the right thing. I love to hear that because a lot of times people think all pastors are jacklegging and just hustling, but no, not everybody's out there doing that. So, Reverend Webster, thank you for your time, and definitely appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, Philip. Thank you, and thanks to Brother Coleman for connecting us.